I moved into a small house in the countryside about 2 years ago. At the time, I was coming out of a long-term relationship and needed a quiet place, far from the chaos of the city. I found this house randomly on a rental website, and the price was too good to pass up. It was small but cozy, surrounded by trees, with a beautiful view of an open field. It seemed to promise peace, exactly what I needed. The landlord, a man named Tom, lived in a bigger house nearby and seemed friendly when we first met. He said he was in charge of maintaining the property and that I could reach out to him for anything. At first, it seemed perfect. The first few days were like a dream. Waking up to the sound of birds, taking my dog, Max, for walks, and having coffee on the porch in that peaceful silence was everything I needed. But as the weeks went by, I started noticing some strange things. Nothing major, just little things out of place inside the house. A cup I was sure I left on the drying rack would appear in the sink. Socks went missing from the laundry basket, only to show up days later on the couch. I figured I was just being scatterbrained. It had been a rough time for me, and my mind was all over the place, so I didn't think too much of it. Max, however, started acting strange. He'd always been a calm, gentle dog, but he was becoming restless, especially at night. He'd sit by the front door, growling softly. One night he barked so much I got up to check if there was anything outside, but there was nothing. The next morning I noticed faint scratches on the lock. It looked like someone had tried to mess with it, but not forcefully. Even then, I convinced myself it was Max pawing at the door, even though he'd never done that before. The feeling that something wasn't right became impossible to ignore. I started double-checking the locks before bed, but the unease never went away. One afternoon when I got back from a quick trip to the store, I noticed the front door was locked differently than how I'd left it. There was a faint scuff mark on the wood, right by the knob. My heart raced, but I tried convincing myself it was just paranoia. The house was old, and Tom had mentioned the locks were fragile and needed replacing soon. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After that, I started looking at Tom differently. He showed up unannounced often, usually saying he was just checking if everything was okay, or bringing over fruit from his yard. At first I thought it was considerate, but soon his concern started to bother me. It was always the same tone, like he was trying to justify being there. Tom had a spare key to the house, and although he mentioned this early on as a safety measure, it now made me uneasy. I started noticing he knew details about the house that he shouldn't have, things only someone who had been inside would know. One night, I woke up to Max barking like someone was in the yard. I grabbed a flashlight, my heart pounding, and went to the window. I saw a shadow near the shed next to the house, but when I pointed the light, nothing was there. From that moment on, I felt completely vulnerable. It wasn't just a feeling that something was wrong, it was like I was being watched all the time. Tom became even more insistent in the days that followed, and that only heightened my paranoia. I started avoiding opening the door when he showed up. The tipping point came one morning when I had to leave early to run errands in town. When I returned, I found one of the bedroom windows slightly open. I distinctly remembered locking it before I left, and the realization sent a chill down my spine. I stepped inside cautiously, with Max growling behind me, and there was a strange, musty smell, like damp earth, that only appeared when the house had been closed for a while. But something was different. My bedside lamp, which I always kept on the nightstand, had been moved. There was no way I had forgotten again. I felt completely violated, and for the first time, I seriously considered calling the police. I decided to find out the truth once and for all. I discreetly set up a camera I'd bought years ago and never used. I hid it in the corner of the living room, aimed at the front door. The idea made me nervous, but I needed answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. Max seemed to share my anxiety, pacing back and forth. When morning finally came, I checked the footage. My stomach turned when I saw Tom entering through the door with his own key. He walked through the living room, adjusted the cushions on the couch, and even opened the fridge like it was his own house. On the footage, Tom looked completely at ease. He walked slowly, inspecting every corner of the house like he was evaluating it. At one point, he even sat in my favorite armchair and stayed there for a few minutes, scrolling through his phone. The worst part was when he entered my bedroom. My heart pounded as I watched. He opened my closet, looked through my clothes, and then stopped by the bed, running his hand along the headboard. I felt violated in a way I couldn't even describe. This wasn't just an invasion of privacy. It was like he was marking his territory, making it clear that the space wasn't entirely mine. I couldn't face Tom for a few days, but I knew I had to confront him. The next morning, with the camera still hidden, I waited for him to show up. When he finally arrived, he came with the same smile as always, and a bag of oranges. I confronted him right there, barely containing the anger boiling inside me. I asked him if he had entered the house recently. He laughed like it was something trivial and said, "Oh, I just took a quick look to make sure everything was in order. Didn't want to bother you." The casualness in his response left me speechless. To him, it was no big deal. I told him I knew what he'd done and that I had proof. His smile faded for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure, saying I was overreacting and that he was only concerned about my safety. I felt my blood boiling. I asked if safety included going into my bedroom and touching my belongings. He went quiet for a few seconds before replying, "I just wanted to make sure you were taking care of the place." That was all I needed to hear. I told him if he didn't hand over the spare key and stop showing up unannounced, I'd call the police. Tom gave in, but the look he gave me was unsettling. He handed me the key and said he didn't want any trouble, but the way he stared before leaving left me with the feeling that this wasn't over. The following days, I stayed on high alert, locking everything and checking the doors constantly. Despite that, the sense of unease never left. It was like he was still there, watching, waiting for the right moment. Max remained restless, but over time he began to calm down, as if even he could sense that for now, things were under control. Even with the spare key back, I knew I couldn't keep living there. The trust was completely broken, and every little noise at night made me jump out of bed. I gave Tom 30 days' notice and told him I was moving out. He didn't seem surprised, but made sure to say, "I'll miss having you around." The way he said it, with that smile I once thought was kind, now sent chills down my spine. I didn't respond and started packing my things that very day. In the final week before leaving, something happened that made me regret not reporting him immediately. I came home after a quick trip to the store and found a small pile of dirt on the living room rug, right in front of the door. It was strange because I always took my shoes off before coming inside. Looking around, I noticed Max was restless again, growling softly near the bedroom. My stomach dropped, and I immediately called a friend in town to spend the night at her place. I decided I wouldn't sleep in that house again until the move. On the day I finally left, as I loaded the last boxes into the car, Tom showed up. He stood by the gate, just watching. He didn't say anything, but his stare was intense, almost like he was challenging my decision. When I shut the car door, he gave a slight wave, with a smile that felt more like triumph than farewell. I didn't look back as I drove away from that place. Even now, years later, I still think about what might have happened if I had stayed any longer. To this day, the whole experience gives me chills. I never fully understood Tom's intentions, but one thing is certain. That man never had good intentions. What started as a peaceful refuge turned into a nightmare. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable living in such an isolated place again. I've learned to trust my instincts more, and if something feels wrong, it probably is. I had just turned 25 when I decided I needed a break from everything. My life in the city was suffocating: work, traffic, the same tired faces every day. That's when I found an ad for a cabin deep in the mountains, far from any sign of civilization. It wasn't exactly luxurious, but it had everything I needed: a roof, a fireplace, and the promise of absolute silence. My plan was to spend 2 months there, away from social media, emails, and the chaos of daily life. Just me, my books, and nature. But looking back now, I wonder if the peace I craved was exactly what attracted it. The first few days were incredible. I woke up to the sound of birds and went to sleep with the crackling of the firewood. There was a trail right behind the cabin that led to a clearing surrounded by trees so tall it felt like they embraced the sky. I used to go there early in the morning, have my coffee, and just listen to the wind. Everything felt perfect, until one afternoon when I found a small circle of stones with fresh ashes in the middle. It looked like a campfire, but it wasn't mine. I remember freezing for a second, looking around, trying to find an explanation. The cabin was at least 10 miles from the nearest road. Who else could be out here? That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Could it have been a hunter? Or a hiker passing through? Maybe. But something about it felt off. The fire seemed recent, like it had been extinguished that morning. The next day when I returned to the clearing, I found something new. A small pile of trash near the fire pit. Pieces of food wrappers, a crushed water bottle, and most unsettling, a pair of dirty socks tossed carelessly. I used a stick to poke around, but nothing gave me any clues about who might have left it. Back at the cabin, I tried convincing myself it was just a sign someone had passed through and was already gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On the third day, I noticed something even stranger. I stepped out onto the porch in the morning with a cup of coffee and saw that my lounge chair was slightly turned, like someone had dragged it. I was meticulous about things like that. I knew exactly where each piece of furniture was. The detail bothered me enough to walk around the cabin, checking doors and windows. Everything was locked, just as I had left it the night before. But the sense of unease was already settling in. With every step I took, it felt like something, or someone, was always just out of reach, close enough to unsettle me, but far enough to remain hidden. The next morning, I decided to explore the area around the cabin more thoroughly. I grabbed a flashlight as the sky was unusually overcast and followed the trail to the clearing. Everything seemed normal until I noticed footprints in the soft dirt, ones that definitely weren't mine. They were wide, deeper than I expected, as if whoever made them was carrying something heavy. The most disturbing part was their direction. They came from the clearing and led straight to my cabin. I couldn't stop the chill that ran through me as I scanned the woods, the silence now feeling oppressive. I tried to follow the tracks for a few yards, but they vanished among the roots and leaves. I stood there, gripping the flashlight tightly as if it could protect me from something I couldn't even name. When I got back to the cabin, the unease had turned into full-blown anxiety. I closed all the curtains and locked the doors again, double-checking every window. The silence that I once cherished now felt suffocating. While I was in the kitchen making tea, I heard a faint sound coming from the porch. It was like something lightly tapping against the wood. My heart raced, and for a moment I was frozen. Then, taking a deep breath, I forced myself to open the door, clutching a kitchen knife, just in case. There was nothing there, at least nothing obvious. But when I looked down, I saw something that definitely wasn't mine. A round stone, about the size of a tennis ball, placed right in the middle of the step. It seemed deliberate, like a sign. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding like a drum. That night, I could barely sleep. Every little sound, the wind in the trees, the creaking of the wood, felt amplified, charged with a meaning I couldn't grasp. When I finally dozed off, I was jolted awake by a loud noise, like something heavy had fallen. I jumped out of bed, grabbing the flashlight. The cabin was pitch black, and for a moment I thought about turning on the lights, but instinct stopped me. Instead, I opened the bedroom door slowly, the flashlight shaking in my hand. And there it was, the lounge chair from the porch, now toppled in the middle of the living room. But the strangest part was the front door, which I was absolutely sure I had locked. It was slightly ajar. By now, fear had turned into near panic. I slammed the door shut, barricaded it with a chair, and retreated to the bedroom, trying to figure out what to do. Calling the police seemed useless. The place was so remote, they'd probably arrive the next day. I grabbed my phone, but of course, there was no signal. Of course not. It was exactly the kind of thing that only happens in nightmares, and I was right in the middle of one. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, sitting on the bed with the kitchen knife in one hand and the flashlight in the other, waiting for some sound, some movement. Nothing else happened, but the silence that returned felt even worse than the noise. When the sun finally rose, I was exhausted, but the daylight brought a false sense of safety. I decided I couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed in some clothes and supplies, and made up my mind to hike to the main road and look for help, or at least a cell signal. While locking up the cabin, I noticed something new: scratch marks on the outside of the front door, as if someone or something had tried to force their way in during the night. The scratches were long and uneven, deep enough to gouge chunks of the wood. My stomach turned, but I forced myself to move forward. I had to get out of there before something worse happened. The walk to the road was long and grueling. The forest felt denser than I remembered, as if the trees had crept closer during the night. The silence was oppressive, and I kept glancing over my shoulder every few steps, expecting to see something following me. After about an hour of walking, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. A small pile of stones, just like the one I'd found on the porch, but this time in the middle of the trail. They were arranged in a strange, almost ritualistic pattern. I stood there staring at them for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it. Was it some kind of warning? Or worse, a taunt? I decided to ignore the stones and kept walking, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every time the wind rustled the leaves or a branch snapped, my heart would leap into my throat. When I finally reached the road, I felt an immense sense of relief, until I realized that the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. In fact, it felt stronger now. I looked around, scanning for any sign of another person, but there was nothing, just the empty road and the mountains in the distance. I pulled out my phone, and this time, I had a signal. I called the police, trying to explain what was happening. They promised to send someone, but they made it clear it could take hours for them to get there. I decided to wait right there, sitting by the side of the road. While I waited, I heard footsteps behind me, coming from the trail I had just left. They weren't fast or heavy, but slow, deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, it was wanted me to know they were there. I turned abruptly, but there was no one there. The sound stopped the moment I looked. Whatever it was seemed to be playing with me, testing the limits of my sanity. I picked up a rock from the ground, just to feel like I had something to defend myself with, and stood there staring at the entrance to the trail. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when I finally heard the distant sound of a siren, I felt as if I had been saved in the nick of time. As soon as the police arrived, I ran to them, trying to explain everything at once. They looked skeptical but promised to check it out. The officers asked me to take them back to the cabin. Reluctantly, I agreed. As we walked back through the trail, the forest felt even quieter than before, as if it were holding its breath. They checked the cabin thoroughly, inspecting the footprints near the clearing and even the scratches on the door. One of the officers, an older man with a seasoned look, said it was probably a drifter or some kind of hermit living in the woods. They like to mess with people to scare them off and protect their territory, he explained. It made sense, but something deep inside me didn't believe it was that simple. There was something more in that forest, something none of us could understand. After the officers left, they advised me to leave the cabin and find somewhere else to stay. They promised to patrol the area over the next few days, but I knew they wouldn't stick around for long. That night I went back to the cabin only to grab my belongings and drive to the nearest town. The place felt different now, as if it was charged with an energy I couldn't explain. Every sound, every shadow, seemed to amplify the fear already rooted inside me. While I was throwing my things into the car, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A figure standing at the edge of the forest, far enough that I couldn't make out any details. Just a motionless shadow. When I turned fully to look, it was gone. I drove nonstop to the nearest town and spent the night at a cheap motel. As I tried to sleep, I kept thinking about everything that had happened. Who, or what, was in the forest? Why did it feel so intentional, almost personal? I never got answers to those questions, and to this day, I avoid any place that's too remote. I've experienced strange things before, but nothing comes close to that. A few months later, the cabin's owner called me, saying there were no more signs of intruders and asking if I wanted to come back. I refused immediately. Just hearing his voice made my stomach turn. I never want to set foot in that forest again. Even now, years later, I still have occasional nightmares. Sometimes it's the figure in the forest. Other times, it's the sound of slow footsteps behind me. I always wake up in a cold sweat, with the feeling that something is watching me, even in the safety of my home. It might sound paranoid, but some things stay with you, like invisible scars. And that cabin, that forest, it wasn't just a remote place. There was something else there, something I never want to understand. My wife, Sarah, and I decided to take a weekend off to disconnect. We were exhausted from our daily routine in the city, and a remote Airbnb farmhouse sounded perfect. The house was isolated, surrounded by open fields as far as the eye could see, with an old barn nearby and a gravel driveway leading directly to the porch. It was exactly what we needed to relax. We arrived early in the afternoon with the sun still high in the sky and spent the day exploring the property. Sarah loved the view, and honestly, I appreciated the near absolute silence. That first night, as we were watching a movie on the laptop, we heard footsteps on the gravel outside. They were light, spaced apart, as if someone was calmly walking down the driveway. I thought it might just be my imagination, maybe the wind, but Sarah heard it too. "It's probably a curious neighbor," she said, and I agreed. After all, we were in the middle of nowhere. Maybe someone just came to see who was staying at the property. I decided not to overthink it. The next morning, something strange caught my attention. There were tire tracks in the dirt near the porch, tracks that definitely weren't there when we arrived. It wasn't unusual for a place like this, but something about it unsettled me. Sarah suggested we ask the property owner, so I sent him a message. He replied quickly, saying no one else should be on the property. "Maybe a truck passed by on the main road," Sarah said, trying to reassure me. Even so, the unease lingered. That night, the footsteps returned, but this time they were closer and more frequent. The distinct sound of gravel crunching underfoot echoed in the silence. I looked out the window, but the darkness was so thick, I could only see the faint reflection of the porch light. I decided to open the door and check, but Sarah begged me not to. "What if it's someone? We don't know the people around here." I tried to argue that it was better to confront whatever it was than ignore it, but deep down, I was hesitant too. So we locked the door and went to bed, pretending it was nothing. We woke up the next morning with an uneasy feeling. Sarah called me over to see something on the porch. One of the wooden chairs by the door was tipped over as if someone had sat in it and knocked it over when they left. "Did you move this last night?" she asked, already knowing the answer. I said no, but I tried to convince myself that maybe the wind had knocked it over. It didn't make much sense, though, since there hadn't been any strong wind that night. But it was easier to believe than the alternative. As we walked around the property, we noticed something else that made me even more uneasy. Near the barn, in the damp soil, there were fresh tire tracks, the grooves still sharply defined in the mud. We went over to check, but there was no vehicle and no sign of anyone nearby. Sarah started to get nervous and suggested that maybe the owner had come by without telling us. I sent him another message, and his response was quick and clear. "I haven't been there. No one should be there except you." That was enough to make Sarah visibly scared. I tried to stay calm, but internally, I was on high alert. Back at the house, we began noticing other details that seemed insignificant at first. Small scratches on the door, as if someone had tried to open it, and a thin layer of smudges on the windows, like someone had pressed their hands or face against the glass to peer inside. "Do you think someone's using this place without the owner knowing?" Sarah suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to answer, but the idea was starting to feel more plausible. That night we decided to leave all the outdoor lights on. I even made a makeshift barricade with chairs in front of the door, just to feel a little more in control. We tried to watch a movie to distract ourselves, but we went silent when we heard the footsteps on the gravel again. This time, they were accompanied by the sound of something being dragged, like wood scraping against stone. I went to the nearest window, heart pounding, and peeked out through a crack. I couldn't see anything. The sound stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was almost deafening. The silence that night was even more terrifying than the sounds we had heard before. Sarah was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and I felt powerless, not knowing what to do. After a few minutes without any noise, I decided to grab a flashlight and take a look outside. Sarah begged me not to go, but the thought of sitting there and doing nothing felt worse. I opened the door slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and shone it down the gravel driveway. Everything seemed normal, but the air felt heavy, like something was watching us. I took a few steps onto the porch and noticed something strange at the barn. The door, which had been shut when we arrived, was now slightly ajar. A small chain dangled from the side, swaying gently as if it had just been unlatched. My instincts told me to run back inside, but curiosity got the better of me. I pointed the flashlight into the barn, and inside I saw only old tools, a pile of hay, and an ancient tractor covered by a tarp. But what sent chills down my spine was the smell, a rotten stench so strong it made me step back. I ran back to the house, trying not to show my fear to avoid worrying Sarah further, but I'm sure my face gave it away. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. I told her about the barn door and the smell, but left out the detail that unsettled me the most. There were footprints in the dirt floor of the barn, fresh ones that didn't belong to us. Sarah suggested calling the police, but we were miles away from the nearest station, and I wasn't even sure how to explain what was happening. The night dragged on endlessly. Every creak of the wooden floor, every sound from the house, made us jump. We decided it was safer to stay in the bedroom with the door locked, at least until morning. Sarah didn't sleep a wink, and even though I tried to stay calm, I couldn't relax for a second. Around 3 in the morning, we heard something fall on the porch. I grabbed the flashlight again, but this time Sarah held onto my arm. "Don't go out there," she said firmly. And for the first time, I agreed. Something was definitely wrong, and we were stuck in the middle of it. When the sun finally rose, I felt a brief sense of relief. Daylight made everything seem less threatening, but what we found outside only reinforced our unease. The porch table was overturned, as if it had been shoved aside. Stranger still was what we found on the ground. A small pile of rocks, carefully stacked, something that definitely wasn't there before. Sarah looked at me, pale, and whispered, "Is this some kind of warning?" I decided it was time to investigate properly. Sarah was reluctant but agreed to come with me. We headed back to the barn, this time in daylight. The door was still open, and the rotten smell seemed even stronger. As we walked, I noticed the footprints I had seen the night before were gone. The ground had been disturbed, as if someone had intentionally tried to erase them. Sarah refused to go inside, so I went alone, holding a piece of wood I found along the way. When I lifted the tarp covering the old tractor, my heart raced. Beneath it, there were clothes, muddy and crumpled, as if someone had been sleeping there. I ran back outside and showed Sarah the clothes, and she looked shocked. We didn't know what to think. Someone was definitely using the barn, but who? And why? We went back to the house, locked everything, and decided to call the property owner. He picked up on the second ring, and his response only made me more nervous. "I swear no one else should be there." "This has never happened before," he said, his voice tense. He promised to come by later that day to check, but he advised us to stay alert and not take any risks. That afternoon we stayed inside, waiting. The tension was unbearable. Every car that passed on the road, every noise from outside made our nerves fray even more. When we finally saw the owner arrive, I felt a wave of relief. He was a tall man with graying hair and a weathered face, and he seemed as confused as we were. We walked the property with him, showing him the tire tracks, the stacked rocks, and of course the clothes in the barn. He had no explanation for any of it, but promised to install security cameras immediately. His presence calmed us a little, but we decided that night would be our last there. Even with the owner's promise to install cameras and monitor the property, that final night at the farmhouse carried an eerie feeling, as though something was watching us. We decided to go to bed early, but sleep didn't come easily. Sarah lay next to me, staring at the ceiling, and I could barely close my eyes without my heart racing at every creak or noise from outside. The silence felt heavier than ever, like it was carrying something with it. Around 2 in the morning, I was jolted awake by a sound unlike anything we'd heard before. It was a metallic scraping, like something being dragged across the gravel. I got up slowly and went to the window. Sarah, hesitant, followed me. The porch light illuminated part of the driveway, and what we saw froze us in place. A tall, hunched figure, dragging what looked like a chain, walking slowly toward the barn. We couldn't see its face. The shadow obscured everything, but its movements were deliberate, as if it knew exactly where it was going. I wanted to run, scream, or do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. Sarah gripped my hand, her palm cold and clammy. We decided not to make any noise and locked the bedroom door. We sat there in absolute silence, listening as heavy footsteps circled the house. The sound stopped for a few minutes, but then we heard something even worse. The doorknob on the front door turning slowly. I held my breath, praying the door wouldn't give. Thankfully, we had reinforced it earlier. When the noise finally stopped, we stayed awake until sunrise, too afraid to leave the room. As soon as the sun came up, we grabbed our things and left as quickly as possible. The owner met us on the way out and apologized, but he looked just as baffled as we were. He promised to investigate and let us know, but we never got a convincing explanation. To this day, we don't know who that figure was, why they were there, or what they wanted. All I know is, I never want to go back to that place again. I've been working as a delivery driver for about 2 years. I've always enjoyed the silence of the road and the solitude of the routine. My main route takes me through a remote highway that cuts through miles of dense forest, where cell signal is practically non-existent, and the only constant sound is the hum of my truck engine. This happened about 6 months ago, back when I was doing late-night deliveries to a small town at the end of that highway. My life was simple then: work, home, and maybe a few beers after my shift. I wasn't the kind of guy who believed in weird stuff, you know, but what I experienced on that highway still keeps me up at night. It started with something that seemed insignificant at first. One night on one of my usual runs, I saw a car parked on the shoulder. It was a dark sedan, maybe a late 90s model. I didn't think much of it. Broken down cars aren't exactly a rare sight out there. But there was something unsettling about this one. Maybe the way it was parked, with its wheels almost sticking out onto the road, like whoever stopped there had done it in a hurry. The only light was from my headlights, and I didn't see anyone nearby. I drove past it, but the image stuck with me for the rest of the trip. The following week I was on the same route, at about the same time, when I saw that car again. This time, it was at one of the few rest stops along the highway. It was parked in the darkest corner, far from the lights. I slowed down, curious, but there was no movement. Just that dark shape sitting there, with its headlights off. It started to bother me, but I told myself it was probably just a coincidence. I even joked with myself, maybe the guy just likes midnight drives. But then things started to get weirder. Every week, that car would be there, always in a different spot. Sometimes on the shoulder, sometimes parked near a deserted intersection. I never saw anyone, just the car. Same model, same beat-up look. I tried to ignore it, but every time I passed it, I felt this chill crawling up my spine. The kind of feeling that makes you check your rearview mirror more times than necessary. I finally told a coworker about it, and his reaction didn't help. He laughed and said I was getting paranoid, but I knew something was wrong. Things really started to spiral out of control a few weeks later. It was a colder than usual night, and I had just finished a delivery. The drive back was long, and I was already feeling the weight of exhaustion. That's when I saw it again. The car was parked at a sharp curve, this time with its low beams on. It felt like it was waiting for me. My heart started racing. I slowed down a bit but kept driving. I glanced at it in my rearview mirror, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The car's headlights turned toward me, as if it was following me. I floored the accelerator, pushing my truck as fast as it could go. When I finally checked the mirror again, it was gone. That night, I got home feeling like something was seriously wrong. It felt like I had carried the car's presence with me, even after leaving it behind. My mind was racing, but I tried convincing myself it was just fatigue. However, that week, strange things started happening outside of work. One night, as I was taking out the trash, I swear I saw a similar car parked across the street. I turned off the porch light to get a better look, but the car drove off before I could see its license plate. That incident left me uneasy. This wasn't just happening on the highway anymore. I knew I had to do something, so on my next trip, I decided to pay closer attention. If I saw the car again, I'd try to get its license plate or at least figure out who was driving it. But that night, the car didn't show up. Nor did it the next night. For a moment, I started to think maybe I had imagined it all, but that relief didn't last long. Almost a week later, as I was heading back from another delivery, I saw the sedan parked right at the entrance to my neighborhood. It wasn't hidden or subtle this time. It was sitting at the curb, facing the main entrance, as if it knew I'd be passing by. This time, my fear turned into anger. I pulled my truck over a few meters away and got out, determined to confront whoever it was. The car's engine was off, but the headlights flickered faintly like they were having electrical issues. I walked toward it slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got close enough, I realized something that sent chills down my spine. The car was empty. There was no one inside. I looked around, scanning the quiet street for any sign of movement, but it was deserted. It felt like the car had been left there just to mess with me. I got back into my truck, shaking, with no idea what to do next. After that day, my routine was never the same. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that car appear at any moment. I told some friends about what was happening, but no one seemed to take it seriously. One of them even suggested that I was overreacting, that maybe it was just a random guy with the same car model crossing paths with me. But I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Not when I started seeing the car in places it had no reason to be, like the parking lot of the grocery store where I shopped, or at the corner of my mom's street. One of those nights, I decided to take a more drastic step. I planned to take a picture of the car if I saw it again. It felt like I needed proof for myself. something to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. And of course, it didn't take long for me to get the chance. It was a particularly quiet night, and I was heading home after a late delivery. The car was parked at an intersection near the edge of town. I grabbed my phone and with trembling hands tried to take a photo. But when I looked at the screen, the car seemed wrong. The image was distorted, as if the vehicle couldn't be captured. I blinked a few times, thinking fatigue was playing tricks on me, but the result was always the same. I couldn't save a clear picture. That unsettled me even more. I decided it was time to talk to the police. The next day, I went to the local station and told them my story. The officer who took my statement tried to stay professional, but I could tell he wasn't taking me seriously. "It could just be someone with the same car model, sir. There's nothing illegal about that," he said. I insisted, describing the times I'd seen the car in the middle of nowhere, but all I got was a pitying look. They logged my report but made it clear there wasn't much they could do. That same night, as I was driving out for another delivery, I felt something I'd never felt before. The certainty that I wasn't alone. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the car's headlights, glowing like unblinking eyes. It was following me, keeping a precise distance. Not too close, not far enough to vanish. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I knew stopping could lead to something terrible, but I had no idea where continuing would take me. In a moment of desperation, I decided to veer off the highway and take a secondary road with sharp curves and almost no streetlights. The secondary road was even more terrifying than I remembered. The tall trees formed a natural tunnel that blocked out almost all the moonlight. My only companion was the sound of my truck's engine, and of course the car's headlights, which stayed fixed in my rearview mirror. I was sweating bullets, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to figure out what to do. There was no cell signal, and stopping was out of the question. The only thought in my mind was to make it to the end of the road, where there was an old bridge crossing a creek. Maybe, if I was lucky, the car would finally give up. When I reached the bridge, something strange happened. The headlights vanished. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting them to reappear around the curve, but there was nothing. I slowed down, unsure if this was a relief or a trap. Then I heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps on wood, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the truck. I glanced at the rearview mirror again and saw nothing, but the sound kept getting louder, closer. It felt like someone was walking on the cargo bed. I could barely breathe. I stopped the truck in the middle of the bridge and got out, armed with nothing but a flashlight. I walked to the back, trying to muster the courage to look. My hand was shaking so much that the flashlight beam wobbled uncontrollably. When I finally pointed it at the cargo bed, it was empty. There was nothing there but the delivery boxes. But the sound was still there, now echoing all around me, like it was coming from the bridge itself. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of one of the truck's windows, there was a figure standing behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The chill I felt at that moment wasn't natural. It was like something was watching me, surrounding me, but refusing to fully reveal itself. After that night, I never saw the car again. I asked to change my route, and the company agreed without asking too many questions. But the feeling of being watched never completely left me. Even now, sometimes I catch a glimpse of headlights in my rearview mirror, even when the road is empty. I don't know what happened on that bridge or why it stopped following me, but one thing I've learned: some roads are meant to be avoided. And if you see the same car more than once in the same place, maybe it's time to change your route, just in case.